Chapter 3 of El Dorado, by Baroness Orczy. Read for LibriVox.org by Karen Savage in June 2007. Chapter 3 The Demon Chance. St. Just would have given much to be back in his lonely, squalid lodgings now. Too late did he realise how wise had been the dictum which had warned him against making or renewing friendships in France. Men had changed with the times. How terribly they had changed! Personal safety had become a fetish with most, a goal so difficult to attain that it had to be fought for and striven for, even at the expense of humanity and of self-respect. Selfishness, the mere cold-blooded insistence for self-advancement, ruled supreme. De Batz, surfeited with foreign money, used it firstly to ensure his own immunity, scattering it to right and left to still the ambition of the public prosecutor, or to satisfy the greed of innumerable spies. What was left over he used for the purpose of pitting the bloodthirsty demagogues one against the other, making of the National Assembly a gigantic bear den, wherein wild beasts could rend one another limb from limb. In the meanwhile, what cared he said it himself, whether hundreds of innocent martyrs perished miserably and uselessly? They were the necessary food whereby the Revolution was to be satiated, and de Batz's schemes enabled to mature. The most precious life in Europe, even, was only to be saved if its price went to swell the pockets of de Batz, or to further his future ambitions. Times had indeed changed an entire nation. St. Just felt as sickened with this self-seeking royalist as he did with the savage brutes who struck to right or left for their own delectation. He was meditating immediate flight back to his lodgings, with the hope of finding there a word for him from the chief, a word to remind him that men did live nowadays who had other aims beside their own advancement, other ideals beside the deification of self. The curtain had descended on the first act, and traditionally, as the works of Monsieur de Moliere demanded it, the three knocks were heard again without any interval. St. Just rose ready with a pretext for parting with his friend. The curtain was being slowly drawn up on the second act, and disclosed Alceste in wrathful conversation with Celimene. Alceste's opening speech is short. Whilst the actor spoke it, Armand had his back to the stage. With hand outstretched, he was murmuring what he hoped would prove a polite excuse for thus leaving his amiable host while the entertainment had only just begun. De Batz, vexed and impatient, had not by any means finished with his friend yet. He thought that his specious arguments, delivered with boundless conviction, had made some impression on the mind of the young man. That impression, however, he desired to deepen, and whilst Armand was worrying his brain to find a plausible excuse for going away, de Batz was racking his to find one for keeping him here. Then it was that the wayward demon Chance intervened. Had St. Just risen but 2 minutes earlier, had his active mind suggested the desired excuse more readily, who knows what unspeakable sorrow, what heart-rending misery, what terrible shame might have been spared both him and those for whom he cared. Those 2 minutes, did he but know it, decided the whole course of his future life. The excuse hovered on his lips. De Batz reluctantly was preparing to bid him good-bye, when Celimene, speaking commonplace words enough in answer to her quarrelsome lover, caused him to drop the hand which he was holding out to his friend, and to turn back towards the stage. It was an exquisite voice that had spoken, a voice mellow and tender, with deep tones in it that betrayed latent power. The voice had caused Armand to look. The lips that spoke forged the first tiny link of that chain which riveted him forever after to the speaker. It is difficult to say if such a thing really exists as love at first sight. Poets and romanticists will have us believe that it does. Idealists swear by it as being the only true love worthy of the name. I do not know if I am prepared to admit their theory with regard to Armand St. Just. Mademoiselle Lange's exquisite voice certainly had charmed him to the extent of making him forget his mistrust of de Batz and his desire to get away. Mechanically, almost, he sat down again, and leaning both elbows on the edge of the box, he rested his chin in his hand and listened. The words which the late Monsieur de Moliere puts into the mouth of Celimene are trite and flippant enough, yet every time that Mademoiselle Lange's lips moved, Armand watched her, entranced. There, no doubt, the matter would have ended. A young man fascinated by a pretty woman on the stage, 'tis a small matter, and one from which there doth not often spring a weary trail of tragic circumstances. Armand, who had a passion for music, would have worshipped at the shrine of Mademoiselle Lange's perfect voice until the curtain came down on the last act, had not his friend de Batz seen the keen enchantment which the actress had produced on the young enthusiast. Now de Batz was a man who never allowed an opportunity to slip by, if that opportunity led towards the furtherance of his own desires. He did not want to lose sight of Armand just yet, and here the good demon Chance had given him an opportunity for obtaining what he wanted. He waited quietly until the fall of the curtain at the end of Act II, then, as Armand, with a sigh of delight, leaned back in his chair, and closing his eyes appeared to be living the last half hour all over again, de Batz remarked with well assumed indifference: "Mademoiselle Lange is a promising young actress. Do you not think so, my friend?" "She has a perfect voice. It was exquisite melody to the ear," replied Armand. "I was conscious of little else." "She is a beautiful woman, nevertheless," continued de Batz with a smile. "During the next act, my good St. Just, I would suggest that you opened your eyes as well as your ears." Armand did as he was bidden. The whole appearance of Mademoiselle Lange seemed in harmony with her voice. She was not very tall, but eminently graceful, with a small oval face and slender, almost childlike figure, which appeared still more so above the wide hoops and draped panniers of the fashions of Moliere's time. Whether she was beautiful or not, the young man hardly knew. Measured by certain standards, she certainly was not so, for her mouth was not small, and her nose anything but classical in outline. But the eyes were brown, and they had that half veiled look in them, shaded with long lashes that seemed to make a perpetual tender appeal to the masculine heart. The lips, too, were full and moist, and the teeth dazzling white. Yes, on the whole we might easily say that she was exquisite, even though we did not admit that she was beautiful. Painter David has made a sketch of her. We have all seen it at the Musee Carnavalet, and all wondered why that charming, if irregular, little face made such an impression of sadness. There are 5 acts in Le Misanthrope, during which Celimene is almost constantly on the stage. At the end of the 4th act, de Batz said casually to his friend: "I have the honour of personal acquaintanceship with Mademoiselle Lange. An you care for an introduction to her, we can go round to the green room after the play." Did prudence then whisper "desist"? Did loyalty to the leader murmur "obey"? It were indeed difficult to say. Armand St. Just was not 25, and Mademoiselle Lange's melodious voice spoke louder than the whisperings of prudence, or even than the call of duty. He thanked de Batz warmly, and during the last half hour, while the misanthropical lover spurned repentant Celimene, he was conscious of a curious sensation of impatience, a tingling of his nerves, a wild, mad longing to hear those full, moist lips pronounce his name, and have those large brown eyes throw their half veiled look into his own. Chapter 3